Greetings. Welcome to the Brother Carlton Show. What are you learning today that will help you better serve God? All right, it's January 28th, 2026, and I want to talk a little bit about faith, fitness, and firepower. Lessons from Marine Corps Bootcamp. All right? You know, the spark that ignited my interest in the Marine Corps began back in late 1975 during my senior year of high school. My friend Ronnie Heaton, he lived down the street from me on Cherokee Road. He invited me over to his house one afternoon. And while we were hanging out, he pulled out a stack of glossy photos, and they were snapshots of young recruits in boot camp caught in mid-action. You know, they were climbing ropes with ease and looked like they were having fun and charging through water and clashing with pugil sticks like warriors, you know. And I was hooked. And their strength and agility, it was mesmerizing. And for someone like me, already interested in physical fitness, it felt like I was staring at the ultimate challenge, right? And Ronnie must have seen the light in my eyes because he said, "You've got to meet my recruiter." Well, enter Staff Sergeant Ryder, a sharp-eyed Marine who radiated confidence and discipline. And with his encouragement, I signed up for the delayed entry program. I really didn't know what I was doing. I was just going in for it because of the physical fitness and strength and all that. I didn't have a father or anybody guiding me in my decisions. I was a minor, so my great-grandmother had to sign for me. I was 17 years old. But it was a ticket to something bigger, the Marine Corps. And I don't know, I couldn't wait. You know, the date was set shortly after my high school graduation in June of 1976. It was when the day came, I stepped onto an airplane for the first time in my life. Maybe the second time, I can't remember. No, it was the second time. First time was when we went to Disneyland. My high school went to Disneyland. We flew out of Stockton Airport. But anyway, you know, excitement mixed with a growing sense of unease as I imagined what lay ahead, but nothing could have prepared me for what hit me the moment I arrived at MCRD. The first thing they did was strip us of any sense of individuality. And that started with our hair. The infamous 30-second haircut was over in a flash. And the stranger staring at me in the mirror had a bare scalp and wide, unrecognizable eyes. That was me. Never had I cut my hair that short. A few days later, we met the man who would become both our tormentors and our molders, the drill instructors, the DI. And there were three of them. I remember their names very well. Sergeant Frias, who later became Staff Sergeant Frias, compact Hispanic man. Sergeant Day, about my height and Caucasian. He carried himself with a no-nonsense air of confidence. And then there was Sergeant McGee, a tall, chiseled African-American man with piercing eyes that seemed to see straight through you. And these men weren't just in shape. They were walking, barking testaments to the Marine Corps physical perfection. And from day one, it was clear that being a Christian wouldn't win me any points. I mean, one time, Sergeant Day, he caught me praying in the squad bay. And he launched into a loud story about a Christian Marine ensuring every recruit within earshot that he was targeting me. I stayed quiet, you know. I just focused on my faith, but I could feel the eyes of the platoon on me. Our days were grueling, beginning at, I think it was 5 a.m. After a chaotic lineup and a rapid-fire hygiene routine, we'd make our beds. If I recall correctly, I was on top of a bunk bed. Meal times were their own kind of punishment. In the chow hall, we were like wind-up toys, marching stiffly with locked arms and unblinking eyes. "All the way in, Private, all the way in," the drill instructors barked as we shuffled forward to grab our trays. Yeah. The same order followed us to our tables, and where we were expected to eat with robotic precision. You know, your eyes down, your mouth moving, but no talking, no looking around. Anyone caught breaking the rules forfeited their meal. Well, I remember I was pretty hungry. I didn't want to lose my meal, so I shut up, kept my eyes down on my food. Now, hunger was a constant companion, but dehydration especially. They allowed, if I recall right, 1 glass of milk per meal, but water was a luxury we couldn't afford in the blazing afternoon heat with temperatures climbing past 90 degrees. I became very resourceful, hoarding peaches, applesauce, anything with even the slightest bit of liquid to sustain me. Eating like a duck, they called it. Duck in, duck out. And we lived by it. Duck in, private, duck in, After chow, the schedule varied but never let up. Some days we practiced hand-to-hand combat or martial arts. Other days we were devoted to weapons training, classroom instruction, or pugil stick battles that left us a bit bruised and breathless. And then there was the drilling, the relentless, endless drilling. Wherever we went, running was mandatory, as if standing still was a sin. And the drill instructors had a sadistic sense of humor, as I recall. One afternoon in the sand pit, it was a hot, gritty patch of hell. When they commanded us to grab handfuls of sand and throw it up in the air. Over and over we obeyed, sand raining down on our sweat-soaked bodies, sticking to our hair and our eyes, and these drill instructors just grinned, clearly enjoying the spectacle, okay? And we were all frustrated and sand sticking in our mouth and in our eyes. And then there were the forced marches. See, they never told me about this stuff before I signed up, for boot camp. But these marches, they weren't just leisure strolls. We were pushed to walk at a blistering pace, staying no more than an M16's length, an M16 rifle length from the recruit in front of us. And if you fell behind, a drill instructor was instantly in your face, spitting venom. Tighten it up, private. And their voices drilling into your skull as much as the sun burned your back. And by the time I collapsed into the bunk each night, every muscle ached, every ounce of energy was drained. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry when I thought about those glossy photos that Ronnie, my elementary school friend, had shown me. He'd conveniently left out the parts about sand pits and dehydration and drill instructors who seemed to delight in breaking you. He probably didn't even know about that. They probably kept it a secret from him, too. But even in those brutal early days, I felt something shifting inside me. I didn't know it yet, but the Marine Corps wasn't just tearing me down. They were building me up into something I didn't yet have the courage to believe I could become. Close order drilling was another activity that we practiced hours on end. They were delighted to instill discipline. That's what they wanted us to do. Take orders. Don't question. They wanted to maximize our fighting effectiveness, cadence, precision, and synchronization. They were all drilled over and over and over again. We had to maintain precise spacing on our ranks. We learned to follow commands. Left face, forward, march. Yeah, general posture was face forward, chest out, shoulders back. We also practiced things like forming columns, flanking, and wheeling. And if you've ever been to a military parade, you've seen the fruits of this discipline and teamwork on display. I mean, it's quite a sight to behold. This was some of the less strenuous training we did. On the other hand, infantry training duty had us going up and down hills in full gear. One time, our first lieutenant didn't think we were performing up to snuff. Never mind that we had guys falling out with heat exhaustion. Not heat stroke, but heat exhaustion, as I recall. I never looked back to see what happened to those guys. He just pushed us to go faster, faster. And when we did stop, you can bet no one pulled out their canteen of water to take a drink without being instructed to do so. Those that were stupid enough to do that one time were harshly disciplined. Of course, I understood it was our instructor's job to break us, if they could, to weed out those that couldn't hack it. In fact, I remember many times them asking if anybody wanted to go back home and to drop out. A lot of hands, not a lot of hands, a few hands went up, but not mine. I was there. I was committed. I wanted to go through with what I had agreed to. But back to the marches, when we finally finished our march and hit the showers, we were told, I don't want to see anybody drinking that water. Well, you can imagine that mouths were filled with water anyway. We opened our mouths and let that cold water, we just gulped it down until the drill instructors caught us and marched us half naked out of the stalls to stand at attention, half naked with our towels wrapped around us until what seemed like an eternity. There was always the fear of doing the wrong thing. It always hung over our shoulders. Every hour. You never knew when the wrath of a superior might come down on you. One night they called the fat bodies. Yeah, the fat bodies. Those were particularly those guys that were particularly out of shape, And they called these fat bodies down to the drill instructors area. These were the guys that were put on a special diet to help them lose weight. You see, you either lost the fat or you put on muscle. Now, I came in at a scrawny 104. I was pretty lean, not scrawny, but I was lean because I'm small bone, so I was about 5'9.5", 148 pounds. And I left at 148 pounds. I thought I put on some muscle, but I never did. But the platoon leader would call these guys out and put them up as though they were pushing them for a squad leader. It was all a setup. In reality, most of them were just making a mockery of these guys. But I remember one of these guys persevered and rose to the occasion. As a reward of proving the platoon leader wrong, he got a good old-fashioned pillow beatdown in the middle of the night from the rest of the squad. Yeah. I remember I heard it. I woke up and I probably heard these guys hitting somebody with a pillow. It was like that film by Stanley Kubrick, Full Metal Jacket. If you haven't seen that, it's very realistic. And that drill instructor wasn't just an actor. He was a bona fide drill instructor in real life. So I learned that peer pressure was a formidable force at the Corps. And when I came into the Marine Corps, like I said, 5'9.5", 148 pounds, I was the type of guy who could never gain weight, no matter what I ate. I had a high metabolism. I came out of the Corps at about the same weight, but I was in the best shape of my life. I thought I'd breeze through basic training because I was relatively athletic in high school and all through grammar school, but I was wrong. My skinny legs especially gave me trouble because they turned out to be a lot weaker than I thought, especially during those forced marches. I remember one time, Sergeant Day, he caught me on a march, and I had obviously displeased him. Maybe I made a small mistake here and there. "Private Pruitt!" He barked at me. He was looking right at me intensely, and for some reason, I found his facial expression amusing, and I cracked a smile. His face screwed up tight, and I thought he was going to blow a gasket. "Do you think this is funny, Private?" he screamed. "You see me in the squad bay afterwards," he said. Yeah, I managed to get out the obligatory, "Sir, yes, sir." Later, I found myself in the squad bay with several other recruits who were not holding their rifles properly or were not marching fast enough or simply had the misfortune of ever being born. The squad bay was a tight little area. A tight little area with a tile floor, maybe, 10 by 10 perhaps. And we were all crammed together. And the Sarge made us begin to exercise, doing push-ups, jumping jacks, and squat thrusts as fast as we could. It didn't take long until sweat was flowing freely from our foreheads. If anyone started to lag, the sergeant would call them out by names, yelling, "Thank you, Private so-and-so," to which all of us would parrot, "Thank you, Private so-and-so." It was really comically absurd. And I remember this vividly because whether I messed up or not, it seemed I participated in this ritual almost nightly. Physical training was a daily occurrence except for Sunday in my squad, 3057, as well as the entire platoon. I remember being told that the 3rd Battalion had the most rigorous PT among the ranks. I guess that's why they put me in there, because they thought I was in pretty good shape. Because I used to go out and run with these recruiters when I was in high school. Anyway, the cadence that we sang during PT each day is forever etched in my brain. Here's what they said. The platoon leader would say like this: "When I die, gonna go to heaven." Company would repeat it. "When I die, gonna go to heaven." Platoon leader would say, "'Cause I lived my hell in 3057." And then the company would repeat that. I mean, boots, shorts, white t-shirts, and canteen were standard for PT. The canteen, however, was only for emergencies like heat stroke and so on. By the way, when we were required to say that little chant, "When I die, gonna go to heaven because I live my hell in 3057," I just moved my lips. I never actually said it. I was a Christian. I couldn't say that. I didn't feel like it was right. All right. So anyway, our canteen was placed back in our foot lockers. We didn't enjoy a drop of water. And to this day, I can go for, long periods of time without water. Yeah. But sometimes I leave myself dehydrated. But anyway, that was part of the program. And, but man, I'll tell you, that's all I thought about most of the time was water. I was always dehydrated. Rifle training was another frequent occurrence at boot camp. The Marines were the most stringent of all the armed forces when it came to rifle marksmanship. I remember one time at rifle training, we were told to put in our flag safeties, right? These were these little rubber devices that were inserted into the rifle to keep it from firing. And myself, along with a few other recruits, we neglected to insert these. So upon inspection, we were pulled out and made to run down a steep hill as fast as we could. "Grab a rock," we were told. "Run back up the hill." At the top of the hill, I presented my rock to the DI, and he replied, "This is a pebble. Bring me a bigger rock. Bring me the biggest rock you can find." I think the next rock was big enough to satisfy him, but the entire ordeal ensured I never forgot to put my flag safety in again, I'll tell you that. Eventually, rifle pre-qual day arrived, pre-qualification day, that is, and I fell short, way short. And I'm trying to shoot the target with these glasses that I wore that were as thick as bottles, Coke bottles. I was very nearsighted. Anyway, we worked through every shooting position, standing, kneeling, squatting, and prone at 200 meters, 300 meters. My shots were all over the place. The furthest test, the prone position at 500 meters, felt impossible. I didn't even qualify that day, and I could see the disappointment in my drill instructor's face. Well, but when qualification day came, something changed for some reason. Determined not to fail, I tightened up my focus and gave it my all, really. I just did the best I could. And by the time I aimed down range in the prone position, everything felt sharper, clearer, even with my thick glasses, which were a source of constant ribbing since contacts weren't allowed back then. I squeezed the trigger, and one by one, the rounds hit home. 10 shots, 10 bullseyes. Wow. When I finally looked at my grouping, I could hardly believe it. The recruit with the Coke bottle lenses had nailed it. And I remember later on, Sergeant McGee, a man of very few words and even fewer compliments, approached me a week later. "Private," he said, "you did pretty good at the rifle range." And that's what he said before walking off. I watched him go, a rare smile creeping across my face. Huh? I thought. Yeah, that was nice. Now, amidst the relentless grind of boot camp, mail call was another rare bright spot. I'll tell you, I look forward to it each night. Each evening, the platoon would gather, sitting on their butts in the squad bay next to the office as the drill instructors hurled our letters at us, literally throwing them at us, calling out our name. Our hand would go up, and they'd throw them at us. And the mail wasn't just paper, it was hope. Letters from wives and girlfriends and friends back home felt like a lifeline. But not all letters were welcome. Sometimes a recruit would receive a dreaded, quote, "Dear John" letter, news of a breakup or divorce request that crushed their spirit, I imagine. Now, on those nights, the rest of us would rally around trying to lift their spirits, For me, the letters were a source of strength. Most were from my great-grandmother and friends, filled with prayers and encouragement, as I recall, to see me through those grueling 13 weeks. And their words reminded me of what waited for me outside those gates. It really gave me a reason to push forward. Sundays provided another brief reprieve. Chapel services were short, an hour of preaching and singing, but for me, they were a lifeline. This was the one place where my faith wasn't questioned or mocked. I took advantage of it every Sunday. Some recruits skipped it, but I never did miss a service. Those Sundays weren't just spiritual refreshment. They were a chance to breathe before the chaos of the week began again. Now, you got to understand something. Boot camp wasn't just about physical endurance. It was about discipline. We learned to break down and reassemble our rifles until the parts felt like an extension of our hands. It just became simple, like brushing your teeth after a while. Laundry day meant scrubbing our uniforms with a stiff bristle brush. Polishing boots was an art form, a spit shine so precise I could reflect. Well, if you did a good job, it could reflect your face like a mirror. I never could do a great spit shine. It was okay, but some of these recruits, they had it down to an art. I wasn't the best at it, but I did get the job done well enough to pass inspection. We even had to clean our brass belt buckles until they shine like, well, I guess you could see a reflection in them too. You see, in the Marine Corps, appearance was a high priority. And by the time I reached week 13, I thought I'd seen it all, but nothing prepared me for the gas chamber. I forgot to mention about that. It was infamous. Whispered about among recruits with equal parts of dread and awe. Oh, the gas chamber. They would talk about how bad it was and how snot would be coming out of your nose and you were blind and you couldn't breathe and all that. I'm sorry to be so gross, but that's what they said. And we stood outside the small sealed room listening as the drill instructor explained what was about to happen. Follow orders and trust your gear and you'll be fine, he barked. But we checked the fit of our masks, ensuring that it was there was an airtight seal, and then we filed into the chamber. And inside that little chamber, the air was thick, very thick. Smoke filled the room. Rows of benches lined the walls, but we didn't have long to get comfortable before we heard, "Mask off," came the command. And the moment I removed my mask, the gas hit me like a truck. I remember my eyes burned, tears streaming uncontrollably. My throat felt like it was on fire. I started coughing and wheezing, desperate to escape, but the drill instructor's voice, it cut through the haze, it seemed. "Do not put your mask back on," he yelled. And I looked over at one of my buddies, doubled over and dry heaving. His face contorted in agony. My vision blurred and my head spun, but I held on. Finally, the order came, "Put your mask back on." I didn't wait to be told twice. As soon as the mask sealed around my face, relief flooded over me. My lungs cleared and I could breathe again. Outside the chamber, the gas chamber, we were debriefed, and the lesson was clear. In the face of an attack, survival depended on staying calm and trusting your gear and following orders. Okay, so you just had to follow orders. Don't question the authority. Don't question your DIs, your drill instructors, okay? Do as you're told. Everything will be all right. Well, overall, I got to say it was a very stressful experience. But like everything else in boot camp, it taught me that I was capable of more than I thought. And week by week, they continued to push us to the brink. But I was still standing, and I wasn't yet done. I remember one guy, I won't mention his name. Poor guy, he had kind of big ears, wore glasses. We were standing at attention one time, and I noticed as I looked over at his body, he was urinating, and a big puddle formed around his legs. And this happened a few times. I guess he had a bladder problem or something, so he probably went to the doctor and they fixed him up with some medicine perhaps. But that stands out. That's a big visual. Anyway, the obstacle course loomed as one of the greatest challenges in boot camp, both physically and mentally. You know, it tested your endurance. It was designed to break you down or make you stronger. In other words, it wasn't just about climbing walls or navigating monkey bars. It was a battlefield simulation, and it tested every ounce of strength and courage and grit we could muster. I was in pretty good shape back then, though. 18 years old. The course was a blast. High and low leg hurdles, rope climbs that burned your arms. I was able to get up there, though, pretty good. Cargo nets swaying high above the ground, and the infamous wall climb that required a superhuman burst of upper body strength. But the true test came one cold moonlight night when the drill instructors decided to up the ante. "Platoon, fall in!" one of them barked, gear strapped to our backs, M16 rifles clutched tightly to our chest. Ahead of us was the barbed wire crawl, which was a narrow passage littered with razor-sharp wire and the echoes of war. You didn't know if they were real guns going off over your head or not. The only way through was on our backs, inching forward in the dirt. And the chill of the ground seeped into our bones as we shimmied along, our gear weighing us down. The pale glow of the moon barely illuminated the path ahead. But the sounds around us were terrifyingly vivid. Mortar rounds exploded nearby, grenades detonated in the distance, and the staccato bursts of small arm fire filled the air. "Keep your heads down," the instructor shouted. Simulation or not, the fear was real. Oh yeah. Every nerve in my body screamed to move faster, but the wire above made haste impossible. To this day, I could swear the rounds whizzing overhead were real bullets. The adrenaline, the chaos, the overwhelming sense of vulnerability, it was a moment I would never forget. And by the time I graduated boot camp on September 8th, 1976, I think that's the right date, I felt a mixture of pride and relief. The worst was behind me, or so I thought. And after the ceremony, I was transferred to Oceanside, California for my MOS, Military Occupational Specialty, training. The Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery Test, or ASVAB, I'd been taking in high school, suggested I would excel in accounting or teaching or real estate. Believe it or not, none of those sounded particularly appealing. I didn't like teaching, wasn't great at accounting, because I didn't like math. And though I eventually gave real estate a shot, that's a story for another chapter. I got my license, but, didn't really pan out. Instead, I found myself with a monotonous job of making entries into Marine Corps record books. It wasn't glamorous, but it was my assignment, and I threw myself into it the best I could. It was during this time in Oceanside, about 2 months in, that I got word my friend, Doug Summers, was getting married. Doug and I went back to Faith Baptist Church. He was a good man, a wounded Marine veteran who carried visible scars from his days in Vietnam. His hip had been blown apart, leaving him with a pronounced limp, and shrapnel had disfigured his nose. But despite all that, Doug's mind was sharp. No, Doug wasn't just a friend. He was a mentor. His deep knowledge of the Bible and unwavering faith made a lasting impression on me, especially during those formative years after I made a profession of faith. I admired him not only for his resilience, but for his ability to find strength and purpose in the face of unimaginable hardship. I mean, can you imagine going through Vietnam War and experiencing being wounded? I think he got the Purple Heart, if I'm not mistaken. His wedding was a reminder of the bonds that carried us through, his friendships. The friendships that we had at Faith Baptist. And it really anchored us amidst all the chaos. But little did I know that his influence would shape my own spiritual journey in ways I couldn't yet imagine. The wedding in Stockton, California was a brief but memorable interlude. After a day of two of celebration, I was back on a plane to Oceanside, ready to dive into the next phase of my training. Life as a Marine had its rhythms, and one of them was the weekly ritual of hauling our uniforms into the city, Oceanside, to have them pressed. We'd pile onto the bus, drop off our neatly folded attire, and then have a few hours to kill before picking them up a day or two later. It usually took just a couple of days. But in those moments of freedom, the city became our playground. And some of us found enjoyment in the cool, dark corners of the movie theater. I still remember watching the film The Mechanic with Charles Bronson and Jan Michael Vincent, both deceased now, completely absorbed by the intensity of their performances. Another time I caught Vigilante Force, starring Jan Michael Vincent again, and I think it was Chris Christopherson and Victoria Principal. For a couple of hours, the harsh realities of marine life faded into the flickering light of Hollywood magic. On one of those outings, I stumbled into a bookstore, a haven for myself, because I like books, And my eyes, they scanned the shelves until they landed on a book by a man named Willie Mosconi, the legendary pool player. And for an avid pool enthusiast like myself, it was a treasure. Mosconi wasn't just a champion. He was a master who had consulted on the classic film The Hustler, starring Paul Newman and Jackie Gleason. Well, reading about Mosconi's role in the movie was a revelation. Jackie Gleason, I learned, grew up hustling on the rough streets of Brooklyn. His skull so sharp that he performed all his own pool shots in the film. Newman, on the other hand, was a novice, but in true Paul Newman fashion, he rose to the challenge, installing a pool table in his apartment and practiced tirelessly for hours each day. By the time filming began, he was good, real good. Good enough to handle the most difficult of trick shots. The ones he couldn't, Mosconi stepped in, his expertise making the impossible look effortless. And that book didn't just teach me about pool, it sharpened my own game on the base, giving me a rare edge in my own downtime. Yeah, I love pool. Was never that good at it until I started reading this book. That's how I became so good at chess during high school, by reading a book. So for you out there who don't like reading, let me encourage you to become an avid reader. Up your game, improve your skills and your knowledge. Of course, now I got to go back to the Corps and let you know that life in the Corps wasn't all polished uniforms and quiet evenings with the cue stick. Tensions ran high, and sometimes they boiled over. I remember one time that two Marines going at it one day, fists flying and tempers flaring. It was a boxing match, bare-knuckled. I stayed out of those fights whenever I could. At 5'9.5", 148, I knew better than to throw myself into a losing battle. I wasn't a boxer at the time. I was more of a wrestler or maybe a street fighter. But anyway, sparring, that was different. Once I stepped into the ring with another Marine, a wiry guy, as I recall, tough little guy, African-American. He was a little shorter than me. We suited up with these 16-ounce gloves and headgear, and the bell rang. I held my own, but I was far from a polished fighter. We were out there banging one another like novices that we were. Probably looked ridiculous. Anyway, my skills leaned more toward wrestling and a few clumsy karate kicks, probably, than the discipline of boxing. Still, the experience stuck with me, planting a seed that would grow years later when I finally joined a gym and started learning the sweet science for real. I often think back to the great boxers I crossed paths with during my time. I remember seeing Yaqui Lopez, the Indian warrior from Stockton, training at the YMCA gym where I worked out occasionally in my teen years. And I watched Freddie Hutchins go down in a fiery bout later on against Alex Ramos at the Civic Auditorium in Stockton. Those moments scattered across the years remind me how much grit it takes to step into the ring or into life and come out swinging. Well, hope you enjoyed this. It was a bit long. But I wanted to share my experience with you, because Marine Corps boot camp was no joke. I look back on it and I wonder, what was the purpose of all of it? Well, all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are the called according to his purpose, Romans 8:28. So, let this story teach you something, okay? And if you like this message, give me a thumbs up. Share it with a friend. And until we meet again, may the Lord richly bless you. Have a great day.